All right, take two, this time with the microphone working. Okay, so this section today here is reading cover to cover from the Parinama Method. We're at page 280. And this is a follow-up from the techniques, not the techniques, the interruption assessment from the last reading. So if you're following along in the book, it's 279. Page 279. And what we did there is we looked at the hubs and made an assessment about which hubs are strong relative to others. And this is a big origin story part of Parinama because it comes from when I was a leader, an executive, and I was building and running teams. And what I would see with people actually inspired a lot, like came before Parinama, was this kind of feeling of being like, how do you reconcile this? Like, how do you reconcile this? And I'm going to tell you what the conundrum is. So the central conundrum is that there are people on a team who are usually, more dominant in terms of having like great idea, having great vision, thinking a lot about like how to bring the team together. And and the thing is they are usually individual contributors that keep getting sort of like run over, for lack of a better, like getting kind of bulldozed by folks who are like lower hub dominant. So this is just more force, more a lot more with like, sort of ease, comfort, sort of joviality, like, and power, like an unapologetic power, and as someone who ran sales teams, a lot of what I would see in this would be, different personalities, especially within the organization where you get sales people who are really ambitious and really forceful. And if I wasn't paying attention, I would not notice that they were taking advantage of other people. And I missed it a lot. Admittedly, I missed it a lot, especially early on in my career. Like the injustice of it, that you'd have people that had great ideas and were great at like caring about how the group like sort of worked together and kept bringing it, like we're really good at figuring out like the right language to use, the right tools, like all this stuff that was like really the creation of like the driving force of our progress. And then you'd have people who weren't like particularly creative but just very forceful, who would sort of co-opt that stuff and then take the credit for it when it succeeded, because they'd be like very action oriented. And so that was, so one of the challenges with this, I'll speak to, is that the weird thing that this does is that the lower hub dominant people that are just like force and action in a lot of ways, like have like reminiscent of the developmental like stages of like in, this will come across as demeaning, like unintentionally, but like the force of a toddler and the sort of, the pleasure center and the drive and like being confident and, fearless and, what is it, hedonistic and and just really confident, yeah, and power, and just sort of as a result powerful and intimidating for a lot of people. And then you have but like not with a lot of ideas and not with a lot of care for how the organization functions holistically. So there's a lot of individualism, and a lot of drive in that, but a lot of individualism. Um, so on the top tier, you have people that don't have that much, have less confidence, are like lack that assurance a bit more, little bit more sort of reserved as a tendency. Less, definitely less confident. The confidence is lower there. And as far as like the sort of like hedonism, enjoyment, they tend to be like really like focused on trying to do a good job a lot. So they're like, while others are like, "Woohoo, let's go out and like party." They're like, "Well, I'm gonna kind of stay late in the office and like work on this stuff." And those are the people that are great at like thinking about how the group works together and are very sensitive to that and very aware. People are really good at figuring out like the right language to be using and messaging, because they paying a lot of attention to others, like to clients, to other people in the company, because they are aware of other people. So they're collecting a lot of information. They have a lot of ideas because they're, once again, they're not, they're just like more outwardly aware and more sensitive in that particular sense, and also have a lot of ideas. And then what happens is you have these upper hub people, um, tend to oddly stay as individual contributors in many organizations unless they start to embody some of the lower hub characteristics. Because the notion of like not being able to really stand your ground and really like be able to lead, um by, like, being able to be like, a bit fearless, being able to be, like, the kind of jovial sort of likability that comes from second hub, and then in third hub, like, just the confidence and the command. Um, they tend to, even though they're driving so much of the innovation of the organization, they tend to be kept as individual contributors, and oddly enough, the lower hub people tend to be elevated into roles that are, like, represented, like, in leadership, and the kind of miss in this is that these are people who tend to be very individualistic. So, as a result of that, what you have is you have organizations that are built off of people who have these qualities. They're very like sort of like hard driving, confident, unabashed. They're pulling from the folks who are kind of more the upper hub dominant. Um, and but little by little, it becomes more like sort of leaders, as like individualistic leaders that have these lower hub qualities. So that had been a really like major inspiration for me as somebody who's pretty balanced in both, balanced and used to being around like lower dominant people in leadership groups. And so I was really, and I was watching, it was like from watching this happen in my organizations, watching um like people ascend who had these like fearless, you know, confident qualities, like ascending, while the people they were actually benefiting off of were kind of being left in the dust in a way and being unrecognized. Because there's also something that happens is like lower hub people ascending. In the beginning, they will be really focused, they'll be really aware and grateful from the people who are like giving them the inspiration and the tools to succeed. But as their success builds momentum, they tend to forget about that, and they tend to really feel very, like, heavily emphasized on, like, what they're doing, being the superpower, when it really, at the end of the day, it really has to do with the values of an organization and what an organization recognizes as meaningful. So, that's a pretty long-winded, like, sort of thing about this, yeah. But I do wanna say that when one of the first writings that I have in the sort of like Parinama scrap pile was like trying to figure out how to, um, like convey that as a phenomenon and even convey that as a professional matter for people. By I think I told it as like a parable that wasn't particularly well written and also just didn't wind up fitting in. Um Once again, that's just part of working something through is the ideas, and where it landed is in here, which is kind of an odd place for it to land. But as far as but the thing is like from the practical standpoint of what is usable here about this methodology is that it's about bringing consciousness to the hubs where we have less power, where we have less potency, where we have less capacity, and working on like the notion of development of them, like bringing more capacity into them, bringing more dynamism into them, um, just in general, as not necessarily as like a strategy, but just like what happens as we start to do this process and work in every single hub. Um, that what we're looking at is like how to, for a lower dominant person to be able to access more ideas and more connection. I mean, this was something in early interviews that I got a lot of, um, like where when I was still talking very much from the standpoint of being like of profession, the values for a professional life, is that people would talk a lot about that, and people would say, I've achieved so much in my career. And these would be people who've been CEOs and high ranking executives of all order. And they'd say, I've achieved so much, but it's just like, I don't feel like I have the ability to have my own ideas. Like I want to start my own company. And that's kinda like, yeah, that's the breakthrough, is getting into the upper hubs, is like where ideation is more possible, and where that kind of attention starts to, kind of open up. Um, and then there were other people, and this was funny because actually here's this is gonna be another tangent, but there was another thing, which was like my original inspiration with Parinama had been, I wanted to like create something to help the upper hub people, because I was like, they need help. Like, I want to help them, and I want to give them tools to work on these lower hub qualities so that they can ascend, because it's important in an organization to have leaders who are able to think in these like more about like how the organization works together, but to apply that, the practicality of driving things forward. Like, because that's the thing that's missing, is like the drive. Because there tends to be like a little bit more of a kind of sort of theoretical thing versus like the lower hub that's like just really about like getting shit done and driving and getting goals accomplished. So it's like bringing a bit more of that, or that consciousness and into like the but the individual. And one of the things that I found was that people who are interested in Parinama were lower hub people, and it was kind of this like initial disappointment for me, which was like, oh, the people I really want to help, for whatever reason, they're not connecting with us. Like, it was like people with power, people, it's like people who already have power tend to really, who, in many ways tend to have a lot of interest in this, quite frankly. Like, and that was something that was, I've told this story before, which was like, I was in an elevator, in the early days when I didn't even know what this was. And I was just talking to people that I knew who were powerful and just trying to kind of hear what they'd say when I said, "Look, I'm developing this thing. I don't really know what it is." Back when I think some people thought I might be like doing something like, you know, building a tech company or some kind of thing like that. I don't know. But I remember it was like, I was like, "Oh, I really want to do this thing where I like, like as previously expressed." And then, I have this memory of more than one memory actually, was when I'd be sort of out hobnobbing with these extraordinary people that I was like, "Yeah, this isn't really for them. I just want to hear what they think." And they would be like, "I want it. I want it. Come to my house and teach it to me and my husband. Come to it." Like, and I was like, there wasn't anything to really teach. I mean, of course, I took up every offer and did it and like made stuff up and figured things out. But um, the aversion of upper hub dominant folks to the lower hubs is something I understand more now. Because the lower hubs are really about trusting yourself. The lower hubs are about your relationship with shame, how you deal with these things. So anyway, So that's like that so look, it got 15 minutes and I've talked about this for 15 minutes. Really, I've done worse with less or whatever. But the reason for this is that this notion that's in here is tucked away in this little corner that is like at the end of the book, hard to find, really. It was like it's very central. So it's kind of interesting to see that and think about it right now. So I'm probably gonna read well, we'll see. We'll just see how this goes because I also wanna make it over for breakfast. So there's that. Okay. So the hub patterns playing to strengths. And once again, the interruption assessment on page 279 is a good place to just bring some attention to this. But if you've just listened to this and you kind of sort of identified, you're going to be able to listen to these and probably identify with them and be like, oh, that's more me. So I'm just going to stop talking about it and just read it. So there are distribution patterns within our hubs. Conscious reclamation allows us to bring attention to the hubs that will enhance and expand the overall quality of our lives. Through conscious reclamation, we can play a more active role in the programming that shapes us. Here, I review the most common patterns, the compelling events that drive change, and some general thoughts on balancing. Oh, that's cool. I forgot about that. Yeah, yeah, and one thing too I will say about hub patterning is that this is a lot of where you start to get people that think who really believe that their tangle is who they are. So it's like back to the parinama tangle being that the events and circumstances from early in life shaped our reflexes, and then we create beliefs that rationalize those reflexes, and that forms what we think is reality. And in that, it forms who we think we are. It's like, look, I'm just sort of defensive. That's just who I am, right? That kind of thing. It's like, if you're going to bring this up to me, I'm going to blah blah blah. And then the thing that happens with that reality is that we project it out into the world. And then the world responds accordingly. So, I mean, how does that work? It means that we project, it's like if you're critical and it's like, yeah, no, 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 like that's just who I am. It's like other people that are comfortable with that are going to magnetize towards you. Like you'll just be around other people that have that worldview, and people who find that kind of repugnant are going to like migrate away. Um, you know, and people just be reacting to those qualities and creating the idea of like the world, like how you respond. I mean, an example is like if you're kind to someone, if you're like, and kind is sort of like, hi, I just mean even real with somebody. If you kind of look somebody in the eye and you're like, just take a moment to actually be present with them and kind of just even be like slightly interested in them, just like genuinely be like, wow, there's a person here in front of me. Like, this is interesting. And like, I care. It's like, versus being like rushed, hurried, um, stressed out, dissociated. Um, as far as like what that does is that it's like how that person responds to you is going to be really different. It's going to depend on where they're at, but it's like the thing is in terms of like who is going to be kind of, I mean, it's not a sure thing that that person is going to respond and be, frustrated with you, but it's kind of like the mirror. You have to smile at the mirror before the mirror smiles back, kind of thing. And so we're putting this tangle out into the world, like we're projecting this out into the world, and then it kind of responds back to us, and then that validates the entire cycle. That just validates the entire cycle. And so That's what these distributions can do, is it can be like, "This is just who I am," and to a certain extent, there's, like, something to that, but on the other hand, the idea that it's a fixed state and that there's nothing that can be done to soften some of the some our adaptations is, not the thing. It's not it. Okay. So lower hub dominant. So higher numbers in hubs 1 through 3 relative to the other hubs. So hubs 1 is, like physical safety. Hubs 2 is like feeling emotion, joy, um, comfort, all that kind of stuff, emotional literacy, emotional capacity. And then 3 is just like power, individuality, and that kind of thing. So that confidence is in there. Okay, the lower hub dominants tend to prefer to keep things steady, not wanting to rock the boat. This work hard, play hard inclination doesn't overthink and tends to have simple expectations, usually following rules and routines. They experience work as virtuous, essential, satisfying, and often physical. Rather than overthinking and intellectualizing, they're usually guided by instinct and emotion, but recoil at the notion of being emotional and are primarily focused on self-preservation and self-gratification. This pattern may consider creative and intellectual work weird, elitist, or nerdy, but when a meaningful relationship calls for deeper self-awareness or they face a crisis like heartbreak, illness, or injury, they may be motivated to contemplate, to reflect, to turn to art and music for comfort, and to yearn for more effective communication. All the domain of upper hubs. This pattern can be supported by expanding social horizons through meeting new people, reading, trying new things, and exploring new ideas, using boundaries in a way that supports feeling safe. So, yeah, I mean, this is like something I would say that the lower hub dominant is usually associated with like masculine, you know, certainly the thing that comes to mind when I think of it and when I think of people, it doesn't mean that it's like gender is actually um like at hand here, even though it tends to, just like play out. Because like as I'm reading this, it's like the images that are coming to mind are people, and the majority of them are like, that like masculine and masculine presenting, like, but certainly like people, yeah, like it's not to say it's like men or women, feminine, masculine, but there is kind of a reality to it. And there is like kind of this reality about like physical force, I think, that is like kind of a whole thing. So now the upper dominant, so higher numbers in hubs 5 through 7 relative to the other hubs. So notice like 4 is not in the mix here. We're talking, so that's, I don't know why I did that, but it's okay. Like we'll get it's okay. So a higher number. So this is like um like words, communication, speaking, vision, and understanding and intellect. So the upper hub dominants tend to be self-reflective and expressive. These thinking, intuitive types struggle with spontaneity and decide how they feel before they take action, sometimes getting stuck in patterns of overthinking that lead to inaction. This pattern is taken advantage of when their talents are used without credit or consideration because they can be seen as people who will not fight back. The compelling events that drive their desire for change come from feeling a lack of power and stability. This pattern may be good at intellectually understanding others' emotions, but their own feelings often remain a mystery. Focusing on grounding, embodiment, and feeling emotion in the lower hubs will support balance. Getting a massage or walking in nature and just taking things a little less seriously can be especially therapeutic. Yeah, I mean, like one thing I would say in terms of this pattern, and there's no fixed, these are just sort of like approximations, is that Like upper hub dominant can is like in the workplace be like almost try to create solidity by being more serious, which actually winds up working against them because what they wind up doing is being kind of so pragmatic and like factual that they're not really like fun. And it's in a common um something that's really missed a lot in professional environments is like the camaraderie aspect. And this is certainly, once you're up in as an executive, it's like most of what you do is kind of like it falls in a lot of camaraderie. Like there's a lot of um like sort of yeah, I don't know, the importance of it, of getting things done. And I think there was something I'd written, I don't know if it made it into the book, about how, like, it like in an as an executive that, like, getting things done by being able to influence people and quite frankly, like, be political is just so important. And so upper hub dominant folks tend to be really, like, more serious, like, a bit more dry. Like, if you wanna get into the Ayurveda of it, is that there it's, like, kind of more vata. Yeah, if it's Ayurvedic, the lower hub dominant would be, like, Kapha Pitta. It'd be, like, earthy and fiery, and the upper hub dominant would be, like, more air, like the vata. Okay, so middle hub dominant, let's do it. A higher number in the third hub relative to other hubs is the middle hub dominants find their identity in activity. They use their bodies and intellect in the service of productivity, but often lose sight of the big picture, not fully aware of why they work so hard or why they choose work over life's enjoyments. The compelling events that drive this pattern to seek change must be self directed. Pleas from loved ones to work less are met with impatience and defensiveness. Change tends to involve becoming aware that the rewards for working are neither linear nor fair, and that there's more to life in the other hubs. Burnout, being laid off or passed over for a promotion, or having a health or personal crisis can cause shifts into embodiment and introspection. Unfortunately, since this pattern is third hub dominant, change usually comes from extremes and rock bottoms, like workaholism. That's a workaholic case. Very common, at least in my world. Very common. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things with that has to do with, like, the relative meaning of work, that it's relative, like, that it's important, but it's important in, you know, not as, like, an absolute things we do. Okay, let's keep going. So, middle gap, lower number in the 4th hub relative to other hubs. Okay, middle gap, lower number in the 4th hub relative, so low number, 4th hub, but the other hubs are strong. So folks with the middle gap pattern are aware of head and body, but are disconnected from them both. This is usually the result of significant interruption to relationship and connection in the 4th hub. They're typically intelligent, intuitive, and creative in the upper hubs, but physically challenged by allergies and chronic pain, or are obsessed with diet and exercise and are sometimes chondriac, chondriacs. There's a better word. There is often a desire to stand up for underdogs and to advance for others, often more effectively than they can for themselves. This pattern tends to be introverted and to struggle with intimacy, though outward appearances can indicate otherwise. The compelling event that causes shifts can be a growing sense that their isolation is not resolving itself. Shifts can occur through relationships with animals and nature. They don't always need to involve people. The techniques and exercises can support this pattern in the second hub with emphasis on attunement and emotion, and in the fourth hub with emphasis on receiving and self-worth, specifically expanding the capacity to receive and deepen connections. Yeah, that's one if you know, you know. I mean, that yeah. That's like that's folks listen, the tough thing with that is that's folks who have, who struggle with love, who weren't taught to love, and that this happens. Like, the ability to love is an ability. Like, the idea that everyone can love is true, but it's kind of like athleticism. It's like the capacity to do so is informed by like our initial sort of development like in loving, and then also just the ongoing like capacity of it. And one thing I'll mention with this is talking about how to expand the capacity to love. It's, a lot of it. So on one hand, it is receiving. So when you're receiving, it is to like one way is like when you're receiving things instead of kind of, it's like someone gives you something, you go, oh my God, it's like, or you're loving with you're having a loving moment with somebody and like kind of bracing protection is to breathe into it and expand more. So in a beautiful moment is to try to have like make the beautiful moment bigger with breathing. So like to take more of it in. So the next time you're with someone you love and you can like even and you can feel maybe some overwhelm or just starting to be like, okay, that's enough, is try a little bit, try to breathe into it a little bit and make it a little bit bigger. Make the capacity to receive the love, make the capacity to appreciate a gift, the capacity to like feel this like a moment with your pet or something you appreciate, is to breathe into it a bit more. And the other is to be able to, and this is related to the second hub, is heartbreak, is to be able to withstand the difficulty of the emotion of heartbreak. Because the more we know that we can bear, we're growing the strength of our heart. So love is both about being able to accept the beauty of it and also be able to withstand and remain resilient in the sort of vicissitudes of life and loss. And so, one of the things about like the capacity in the fourth hub and like with the love and connection shrinking is related to protection. So that's part of it where it's like if we weren't raised in particularly like overly like loving, and open homes and environments, like, and that wasn't like just sort of the air we were breathing, no sort of fourth hub pun intended, is that there's also a protection against that as a small t trauma, which is like needing something and not receiving it. So building the defenses and the adaptations to protect ourselves from it. So for the middle gap, it's the breathing in with the gratitude and appreciation for good moments. And the other is to stay with difficult feelings just a little bit longer. And to realize the capacity for grief is equal and opposite to the capacity to love. To let your heart break, to allow it to break, and to kind of breathe into that breaking and supply it with oxygen and healing and attention and care. All right. That was a little bit longer than expected. Let's see. So balanced. Let's see if I can blast through this in like 5 minutes. So balanced numbers are fairly consistent throughout all the hubs. So some folks have been blessed with minimal interruptions. Some have been taught healthy boundaries, and some were born with a natural inclination towards balance. Not a lot of people, by the way. Not a ton of people. And it isn't just familial. I mean, the thing is that we're raised by community and culture as well, and that we are not being brought up in a culture that is really supporting, like, being, like, well, we're no, let me put it the other way. We're raised in a culture that is very, like, we're always afraid, that pipes fear, like, you're gonna lose your job, you're not gonna be able to pay your mortgage, you're not gonna, like, you're gonna be homeless. That, like, that's not like, people are like, "Oh, that's part of being alive." It's like, no, it's part of being alive in this culture. And also the thing of shame is like, there's something wrong with me. I'm too this, I'm too that, I'm too old, I'm too dumb, I'm too fat, I'm too not well dressed enough, I don't have enough money, I don't, like, just, it's like, "Oh, I have this thing on my face," or "I'm not this," or "I'm not," like the fact that that is just like literally, there's like space made for that, and in some ways it's even considered like sort of like charming and realistic, and like, making yourself like unthreatening and whatever. It's like that, like so the idea that it's like, well, it's, your parents were the ones who could bless you with this. It's like, well, yes, and that if parents were very actively involved in trying to, counterbalance the forces of community. So this is like the kids you went to school with and the adults that were, in your surrounding environment growing up. I mean, they're gonna like have their impact, and then the culture that shapes all of it. So to the thing, I'm just pointing this out where it's like, oh, there are people that are balanced. It's like, not a lot. It's work. Well, okay, maybe here's another thing. There are like the a lot part of this is that it's like the active work, like the active, like you can party yourself to a decent amount of balance, to like actually a lot of balance. So anyway, yeah, there you go. Okay. So much for blasting through this. So okay, the balanced pattern usually has good health and vitality, awareness of feelings without being overwhelmed by them, confidence and power without needing to dominate others, secure attachment in relationships, clear communication and listening, and imagination, wisdom, and a connection with awe, wonder, and inquiry. But when they're interested, balanced folks can benefit from fine tuning their awareness and growing their capacity. So, in professional settings, there are dynamics that play out between different hub patterns. The upper dominants are inspiring, have ideas, are exceptional at communication, and often have, this is what I was talking about earlier. Oops, another spoiler. Often have excellent one on one relationships with people inside and outside the company. Nonetheless, they often struggle with authority, organization, focus, and follow through. Also, complicating matters is their tendency to behave as rigid, overly formal in rigid, overly formal ways when meeting with executives. Upper dominants lack swagger and confidence because they overthink their behavior, causing them to be viewed as more junior than they are. Wow, this is better said than what I this my spoiler was significantly less, like, eloquent than this is. Conversely, lower hub dominants typically exhibit focus, fun, and the brute force of a strong third hub, and are often regarded as top performers even when they are not. A dynamic that can be like apex lions, uh, like the apex lions and the African painted dogs. So see chapter 2 and 6, one of my favorite analogies that I always pull forward. So the lions, the lower dominants, are successful as individual contributors. Still, their lack of imagination and intense individualism sometimes make them difficult fits for leadership of people, and they can be prone to using others' ideas and taking credit. Remember, the lions in the jungle are apex predators not because they can hunt, but because they scavenge off smaller predators. And then the upper dominants, the African painted dogs. That's weird. It never says it's APDs and it doesn't say African painted dogs. The upper dominants with the 85% kill rate keep having their ideas stolen by the lions. Upper dominants often get robbed and struggle as lions keep overtaking them for career advancement and recognition. It's a sign of a healthy culture when the lower dominant lions make sure the upper dominant African painted dogs get the credit they deserve. Despite appearances, the lions are in an unfavorable position. They rely on the ideas of others, and without talented upper dominant people in the organization, they starve. The lower dominants sense their own potential for greatness, but will struggle to find it. So they either need to cultivate champions in an organization or develop their upper hubs. When they work together, incredible things are possible. Okay, you know what? I really shouldn't have said anything. I should have just read that because that is way better than what I said at the beginning of this. Like, way better. Orders of magnitude better. Okay, so there we have it. That's it for today. We made it through. It's not a part one, it's just a part done. And next is long form journal prompts. I don't know how much more of this. Oh, yeah. Oh, the long form journal prompts is kind of a whole thing. Oh, this is like kind of a whole thing. It's the end of this. This is the whole thing. Okay, the long form journal prompts, there's 7 of them. And it takes us for like 6 more pages, 5 more pages, but I'll probably do those one by one. We'll see whatever happens. And then we're on to chapter 12, which I've been incredibly excited about. So I think that's great. I will say that the one of the things that I really liked here was the summary about the balanced pattern usually is good health and vitality. Like they're just explaining what like each of the hubs, awareness of feelings without being overwhelmed by them, confidence and power without needing to dominate others. So that's on page 281 at the beginning of Balanced. I'm actually going to make a note on that because I think that is useful for me. Okay. All right. Enough with me. I'll see you next time. And again, thank you. Thank you for coming along. I really appreciate you. And yeah. And again, any comments, I'll answer them. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.